And then we will give the floor to our PIs or country representatives from each country and ask them to present some of the lessons learned from their perspective and local context. We will then open the floor for the audience to raise some issues or comments to the panelists here. So I'll first give the floor to Soner, please.
Thank you, Enver. Welcome to our last panel session. We will try to keep it as compact as possible. We as coordinators of this project, so we have in total, I guess, if I'm not wrong, 9 or 10 remarks, like concluding remarks. I am sure there are many other things that can be mentioned. Most of them may be repetition, but still needs to be mentioned. First of all, looking back to the primary contribution of this study, is its foregrounding of the nexus between the individual experiences of refugees and the broader policy and legislative frameworks with which they interact. The three-level analysis we applied in our research, macro, meso, and micro, show how legislation and policy filter down into processes of implementation and are then felt and experienced by refugees themselves. I think this is a very important point. So we always try to keep the refugee or the migrants, their approach, their experiences in focus. This is a strength of this dual methodological approach, in our opinion, both to study this micro-level insights together with policy mapping. Some remarks, most of them are mentioned, but the first point that we would like to address is there is a shift. Most of the panelists and the speakers, I think they are very familiar with this. A shift from a civic welcoming approach to a hostile one, or in other terms, a restrictive turn. Actually, in the initial phase of policy responses to the unprecedented scale of human movement in 2015 and 16, these policy responses were mainly predominantly emergency-oriented. But we also witnessed some remarkable examples of civic spirit of solidarity acts of welcome shown to people fleeing from war zones. Over time, rather this quickly, this welcoming approach had cooled down or vanished or just remained or again pushed back from our attentions. With the powerful articulation of far-right populist discourses, opposition to immigration, migration has become a salient political issue in many countries. And this has affected the policy responses. And the policy responses shifted towards securitization of migration. Countries, what they did, they strengthened their borders, built fences, applied stricter migration control regimes. Many countries saw pandemic-related measures, as our keynote speaker addressed, as a window of opportunity to apply stricter measures in migration and asylum policies. We can underline, therefore, a restrictive turn globally in migration and asylum policies. The second point is related to the first point, governance failure of migration or migration control regimes. Tightening entry rules, introducing hard external borders, and externalizing migration control regimes have become the new modus operandi for the migration governance. Simultaneously, many countries at domestic level have introduced more restrictive regulations for immigrant integration driven by a rationale of deterrence. Hard borders usually come together with hard rules for inclusion. They follow the same logic. Restrictive policy, therefore, should be understood in the context of this rise of populism, in which migration is constructed as the main scapegoat of all societal failures, in a way. When it comes to the global governance of migration, we have observed a massive failure in developing common solutions to the experienced problems, which has resulted in weakening of global governance structures, fragmented, divergent practices, and in the wake and aftermath of the crisis, we have seen a shift towards more nationalist agendas. We have also seen a bureaucratic way of thinking in policy making in the field of migration in the field of migration, security thinking, easy fixes and solutions without taking into consideration people suffering, but what will be the consequences of any policy measure on people on the ground. Two trends. By the way, the pictures that we are using here in the slides are taken from our exhibition. So no need to just search for a correlation between the presentation and the pictures, strictly. Two trends, re-rationalization and externalization of migration governance. Actually, our study focused on a period where the governance of migration has been very much affected by the crisis climate and can also be defined as crisis governance. Crisis, in our opinion, constitutes a radical rupture in the status quo or in the established governance structures. In our research, this has revealed in the increased number of fragmented legal frameworks, a high level of ad hocism in legal and political practices, dysfunctional institutions in the wake of crises and emergencies, and decoupling practices in the governance of migration. We can also add renationalization of migration governance in line with the rise of right-wing populism and externalization of migration governance, like as addressed in different panels, remote control migration policies, hotspot approach, and so on, or bilateral agreements as well. These two trends, renationalization and externalization, actually, they also follow the same logic. At EU level, European Union level, this is intergovernmental, pragmatic term, and just leaving behind the normative approach or normative strength of normative power of European Union, which is based on its fundamental principles. At national level, a strategic point dealt within the framework of national security or demographic sensitiveness. So renationalization and externalization in that sense follow the same logic. Another important conclusion of our research is that in the wake and aftermath of 2015 and 16 migration crisis, European migration and asylum regimes have created the conditions of what we call protracted transitionality. We observed this especially in front states, where refugees were both physically and emotionally entrapped and stuck in waiting rooms, living desperately in a legal limbo under precarious conditions and uncertainty. I will just read aloud the quotation from Bahrus Bokhani, a refugee and well-known, the author of No Friend But the Mountains, writing from Manus prison. Especially the last sentence, I think it's very important to understand the liminal lives or this protracted stuckedness, waiting aspect of this, the diminishing detrimental impacts of waiting. This is the point of no return. I can't turn back. What happens to people when this protracted transitionality gets longer and longer, waiting just gets longer and longer, it becomes an unending situation. Here I will stop and give floor to my colleague, Enver.
Thank you, Senator. If we take the next slide, the gap between policies and people. Yes, thank you. Our research has also revealed the deep gap we pointed here between migration policies and people, or newcomers, refugees, migrants, however we call them in different terms. Policies formulated and tested to a large extent do not pay much attention to why people want to migrate and try to understand the root causes and the main drivers of migration, both at structural and at individual levels. So while refugees are objectified, as I've mentioned during the day-to-day, during the asylum procedure, after they receive asylum in the settlement or integration process, they are suddenly expected to turn to ordinary taxpayers and get integrated into the system. And in our understanding, this is one of the main reasons for the shortcomings of policies deployed in migration policies. And the quote here by a Afghani woman in Sweden we interviewed, I think expresses the lack of understanding from policy and authorities in her way of telling her story. I will quote her. "I've been married with my husband for 14 years, but we don't have children. My mother-in-law and her family were always telling me that I had to leave as I couldn't get pregnant, that I was not a healthy woman, that I was not useful. They were pushing my husband to remarry. In Afghanistan, it's man's world. The men decide, but please listen to me. Don't let me go back to jail. The migrant office pushing me down and saying that since I don't have any children, I have to go back. It's the same thing as they would tell me in Afghanistan. No children, no value, but in a different way." So there seems to be no understanding between the different levels of people experiencing their migration and those listening to their stories. Next slide, Sana, please.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. Respond, with its micro-focused, also studied newcomers as agents and with an anthropological gaze aimed at understanding their lived experiences, how they navigate through the highly complex asylum and border regimes to reach their destination, or how they cope along the journey and how they negotiate their own rights and space in a new country. And these are all very notable manifestations that foreground agency of newcomers, both in the context of migration journey and in the settlement process. People migrate in order to find a remedy to the existential crisis that they find themselves in. And here, hope, both at individual and collective levels, is the main driving force for their resilience and explains how they tackle the hardship that they face along the migration journey. Again, a woman from our interview studies in Sweden expressed self-fulfillment in this way. "I faced a very hard situation. Despite all of that, I successfully proved myself and stood on my feet with my work, independence, and language." I think this, which expresses her agency in a very clear and strong way. The next slide is on well-being, trauma, and integration. And here we also see that refugees, which are the subject of integration policies, usually carry the baggage of a traumatic past. The traumas are exacerbated during their journey and also with post-migration stressors in their host country, triggered by everyday life experiences and by their encounters with society and institutions in the new country. And in our interview material, a third of the participants described perceived tensions with security personnel in accommodation centers, and up to a fifth experienced physical or mental assaults by the same people. And this is in the destination countries. So the psychosocial well-being of refugees has been a challenging factor for many Western countries as well, in which integration policies are primarily built upon labor market policies. Still, more than half of our participants answer that they are unemployed, compared to 1/5 in their country of origin. The same people who would respond that they were unemployed. Even more, half of the participants have experienced perceived discrimination in the labor market. So concerning earlier trauma, 2/3 of our participants express examples of such. Half express psychological ill health and a few less physical ill health. So in this regard, Respond research has shown the importance of paying attention to how the health and well-being of people arriving in a new country is related to social determinants during their integration, and also how health issues before and during migration play an ongoing vital role. I think also the quote here again by another Afghani woman expressing her situation in a situation where she will expelled back to Afghanistan. "I cry very quietly so no one will hear me. I don't want my children or my husband to know that I am crying. I have a lot of pain. Some of my neighbors have told me that after 4 rejections, the police will come and deport you back. I am very scared now." Söner, please.
Yeah. I think this is our last slide. So I would like to just first start with reading the poem. No one leaves home unless home is the mouth of a shark. You only run for the border when you see the whole city running as well. A poem, Home, by Varsan Shir. Actually, one of the most interesting conclusions of our ethnographic research is to understand the dialectical relationship between migration and settlement in the context of homeland, homelessness. When people migrate, they burn bridges, metaphorically. They leave everything behind, their homes and their pasts, and start a journey or pre-imagined destinations. Despite the strong emphasis on the political discourse on return migration, this journey is usually a one-way trip. In this journey, home becomes a central marker for settlement and safety, a safe zone to imagine future and ending the experienced homelessness and precarities. I think this is a very interesting point to understand the motivation of people, how they become restless, for example, in transitional lives, in liminal lives, in order to get settled, find a roof over their head. In our interviews, actually, we also come across with different kind of why home accommodation is so much central in people's life, because they left their home. That's very basic. The formula is very basic. When you leave your home, when you leave your country, the first thing that you want to do to build a home, to build a new future. So without a home, without a new country, without settlement, you will always live in liminal lives. So that actually explains also why they are hopeful in their migration journey, how they build resilience on their this abstract, subjective way of understanding of hope or hopelessness. We will end here, I think, and we will just, Ömer, do you have any remarks, yes, or shall we pass?
No, thank you.
Thanks for listening us. And then the first, yes, Germany. Yes, Alexander.
Thank you, Sona. It's of course a difficult exercise to connect our dry findings to these poetic and existential considerations you have just mentioned. And it's of course a difficult exercise to boil down the results of 3 years research into one slide. And so what I'm going to try to do is to present to you the digest of the final chapter that Sabine and I have written for the edited volume. With regard to Germany, Germany has become widely acknowledged for its welcome culture, as it has been called, vis-à-vis refugees. And indeed, we did see a high degree of civic activism in the years 2015, 2016. At the same time, we also saw an uprise of the dark side of civil society, so to say, with attacks on refugee shelters, as you might have recognized. However, and this was very important to us in our chapter in which we tried to sum up the results of our research, that at the same time that we had this positive, or should we say euphemistic discourse on welcome culture, we had a hidden, I don't know, restrictive turn of asylum politics, as you have addressed in your initial presentation, and a reversion of many liberalizations of asylum politics, which the earlier years had already brought. So this was an important part for us to put our response findings in a broader perspective and to explore the asylum discourse in a perspective of several decades. And if you take this perspective, you see that despite the strong trope of welcome culture, there has been a restrictive turn of asylum politics in Germany in the reporting period, so to say, of response, that is 2011 and 2018. This can be broken down to two fields of action, which closely correspond with the response work packages 4 and 3. In the field of reception, there has been promoted a paradigm of what was called integrated refugee management, which is closely associated with the campization and containment of asylum applicants and mass accommodation centers. This is based on a strong rationale of regaining control and comes at a strong cost of early integration, as these mass accommodation centers purport a total containment of refugees for a long period of their initial stay and prevent them from any sort of early integration measures, be it language acquisition, be it social interaction with German citizens, or any other sorts of early integration. And in the realm of protection, finally, we realized that under the rubric of acceleration, of accelerating the asylum procedures, the individual basis for an asylum claim has been eroded through collectivist categories, such as the so-called good or bad prospect to stay, gute oder schlechte Bleibeperspektive, which connects, last sentence, which connects the perspective of an asylum seeker to stay in Germany successfully on his or her country of origin, and thus fades out the individual basis of the asylum claim totally. That's it from our side. Maybe Sabine, would you like to add anything? Okay.
Thank you. Then I will give the floor to Electra from Greece.
1 second. Yeah.
There is another picture of the University of the Aegean. There are different, spaces. No, it was another. Yeah, it was. Oh, doesn't matter. But it was the University of the Aegean, and the building, and the sea and the borders. But okay, this is the Karate Ped, the new camp in Lesbos. And this, okay, it's all together, the solidarity movement, a picture. And they were running PICPA, all the researchers that made, they have research in Greece, in Lesbos, they know this movement, etc. But they cut the picture of the University of the Aegean, but I'm just, going on. The second, please. Okay, thanks. First of all, I would like to thank the organizers of this very interesting and inspiring conference. And I would like to summarize from the part of the Greek team, which is me, Electra Petrakou, Nadina Livaditi, Eva Papagianni, and Angelos Ilias. And what Respond told the Greek team very briefly, okay, first of all, it was, as you see, the fine interplay between theory, policy making, and the hard constraints posed by actual and emergent situations. The effect of policies on the everyday life of people on the move, assisted in establishing a network which allowed us to have knowledge concerning the situation in other areas and countries, allow us to form a social space of academics, activists, employees of the IGOs, NGOs, and the other actors that could respond on the spot to emergency issues concerning migration issues as a unity rather as isolated individuals or from a national point of view. Before closing, I would like to make a few general comments concerning perceptions, policies, and practices. There is a recurrence of the justification of adopting restrictions concerning migration movements. An example of such a recurrent argument is the justification of adoption of strict migration controls and management of border as being necessary for the sake of the protection of the asylum seekers and the refugees' rights. Second comment is related to the specification and division of countries in sending borders, etc. These policies themselves construct such divisions, and this has also as a result the marginalization of other aspects of migration in multi-scale debates and adoption of policies. Just finishing, yeah, in this case, an example is Greece, where the emphasis is placed on a better management of borders and more efficient controls on migration and not on the degradation of migrants of different statuses. And okay, it's a little bit unique. Just directly connected to the above mentioned issues is the grim reality of a constant increase of the violation of rights and the jeopardy of people's life and protections. And just I would like to overall to thank you all of you for this wonderful experience, and thanks all the participants having met either in vivo or in virtual.
Thank you, Elektra.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sorry about the time.
Thank you. I will pass on to Valerie from Sweden. I unmute you.
Yes, thank you very much. This is the Swedish Experience. And we were looking in our review, which is only preliminary, from first the scientific approach, the importance of doing this kind of project and research in a holistic and multidisciplinary framework, both for the process of data gathering and analysis, and not in the least for lessons learned for those coming after. The importance of understanding the integration process always as a public health issue, and public health doesn't only belong to the specialists. Paying attention to social determinants of health as part of a public health framework, which has been integrated but not always expressed in this project. And that includes public health, both the new migrants and the society members. And here we're looking at labor, education, housing, and belonging, for example. Very important for understanding the foundation, for understanding the interaction of this kind of research and these kind of lived experiences. It's always involving public policy, public security, and public health, and based on the law framework. The strength and power of empirical material, including living narratives. The importance of understanding the living cultural worldview of the participants related to strategies of how problems are understood, areas of hope, and not in the least, areas of resources. Okay, next slide, please. If we look at the fieldwork context, important experience in understanding the ethical concerns of not doing harm and how we prepare for that. But also a much neglected area is the adequate preparation of those that are doing the field data gathering, needing to have strategies of self-care. And that's not a usual area. And last, very quickly, our third responsibility as researchers to have public information engagement. Some of these obligations include presenting research results, but always in context. I think that's been very obvious in terms of this conference. Name and begin addressing existing ungrounded and even destructive societal myths. Identify and work with the societal partners, national, regional, voluntary, etc., relating to policy and its interpretation. Identifying work with cultural brokers from the specific communities who are essential, and identifying areas of possible action research for the university research and in cooperation with all of the partners within society. And finally, understanding that this third area of responsibility as researchers creates an area of responsibility and engagement that puts actually pressure on our own processes of coping, meaning, societal interaction, and it requires training, which frankly, most university and research settings have at an inadequate or are totally lacking. Thank you.
Thank you, Valerie. I'll give the word to Niels from Denmark.
Okay, thank you very much. So in the Danish part of the project, we haven't developed a country case. We have worked on various other issues, including some policy recommendations. Here presented a bit presumptuously, perhaps as a solution to the refugee crisis. Can I have the next slide, please? Thanks. So one of the things that we've seen unfold with the refugee crisis has been gross inadequacies in refugee protection in the EU refugee regime. And we've seen many examples of this in the country reports and during earlier sessions in this conference. So just to name a few examples: use of excessive force at border crossings, pushbacks on sea and large numbers of drowned migrants, hopelessly inadequate conditions for refugees, for example, in hotspots, collaboration with third countries to prevent the inflow of refugees into the EU, for example, Libya, where refugees are put in detention centers and are exposed to various forms of abuse and torture, deportations to, for example, Afghanistan, and so on and so forth. So what we've seen has been play out has been, to a large extent, inadequate refugee protection. So this is something that a solution to the refugee crisis would have to address. Can I have the next slide, please? Right. So I think a sustainable solution would have to include at least 3 elements: support for countries neighboring conflict zones. After all, about 85% of refugees are not coming to Europe, but are in developing countries. Relieving these countries by resettling refugees, for example, to Europe. And also, and very importantly, international cooperation as regards distributing refugees amongst destination countries. I want to emphasize the cooperation and international solidarity part here, because the cooperation and relocation schemes are essential, I think. They are necessary in order to provide adequate protection for all refugees. They're necessary in order to secure fair burden sharing among states, which is essential for getting everyone on board in the first place. And finally, cooperation and relocation schemes are necessary in order for states to feel confident enough to remove some of the many non-arrival measures that cause so much harm to refugees, because after all, these non-arrival measures are from pushbacks to violence at the borders, to policies of slashing benefits to refugees to make it less attractive to come to the country, and so on. And in particular, I think it's important to break the link between the country in which asylum is applied for and the country that ends up providing protection, because once this link is broken, becomes much less, there's much less incentive for receiving countries to put all these non-arrival measures in place in the first place. Thanks.
Thank you, Niels. And then I'll give the word to William from Iraq. Unmute, please. William, unmute. All right, let's go on with, I think we'll continue with Carolina from Poland, meanwhile.
Yes, thank you. Regarding lessons learned, yes, it was already mentioned in the morning, Poland is facing transformation from transit to destination country. The 2015 years brought a lot of changes in the approach toward forced migrants. However, contrary to the other investigated countries, the situation was not directly influenced by so-called refugee crisis and increased influx of asylum seekers to Poland, which did not have a place in this case, but by the change of ruling party who used forced migrants as a threat in political discourse. So in case of Poland, the history is diverse in comparison with other Western European countries. This approach in the following years was reflected in activities undertaken by different state actors. We can start with the regular pushbacks used by border guards on Polish border that were already discussed today in the morning session, and almost regular detention of those who were returned according to Dublin III regulations. It is followed by suspension or even withdrawal of preparation on the Polish migration and integration policy, which would set the framework at the state level. However, although there is no official integration policy in Poland, different actors implement actions which proves that Polish integration policy is fragmented and created by different political and non-state institutions. Crucial role play here NGOs, which often fulfill the task of the state in different areas, including legal assistance, delivery of language and job courses, support during labor market integration. They also facilitate refugees' transition from the refugee centers to private housing arrangements. From my personal experience, it was very interesting when we were clashing different experiences regarding when precisely starts integration process and how to define those who should be included in the analyzed group and who are already in the integration process, which in case of Turkey were those with work permission. In Germany, already those who received a status of protection, and in Poland, which should be placed somewhere in between. At the end, as it's the only moment during this conference when I am in a voice, I really would like to say thank you to Onve and Sone for coordination of Respond project, and to all my Polish team, Marta, Justyna, Monika, Konrad, Basia, Agata, Anita, Gagik, and Feras, without whom this project would not have place for me. Thank you to all of you and for all our partners from all different countries for your very good job. And congratulations of this 3 years of cooperation.
Thank you very much. Quickly over to Susan from Turkey.
Okay, well, first of all, I'm here representing additionally 2 other partners from Bilgi University and the Swedish Research Institute in Istanbul. So I just want to also thank them. It's very difficult to sum up the situation in Turkey. We were told to speak for 1 to 2 sentences. So I think the border issue and the issue of externalization, especially with the new pact coming out, are 2 big issues that were dealt with in other panels at this conference already. So I thought I could talk about the issue of integration a little bit. Turkey is not, if it ever was, a transit country, or whatever that means. People who are in Turkey now that we did research with have been there for 9 years. Even without a national or coherent integration policy, people are integrating in different ways. So I would say we need to ask, what kind of integration do we want in various countries, including Turkey? And I was struck by the keynote speaker last night who said that policymakers are dealing with perceptions, not realities. And this is just extremely problematic. And I just want to say one other thing, having just finished a report on belonging in all the Respond countries. There's a lot of talk about how refugees are not maybe going to be loyal enough, or what do they really want, or the security risk. But with the policies we have, they don't feel belonging very strongly, or it's very difficult for many. So I just wonder what is the implication? What do people what do policymakers think will be the outcome of this situation? Thank you.
Thank you very much, Susan. I'll give the word to Veronica from Italy.
So very few words from the Italian landscape that can be applied to, I think, the large majority of the response country we have been analyzing in the past 3 years. And well, the lesson learned: first, we need parliament to go back into the lawmaking process and migration law. We can't accept any more a legal framework which is done simply by governments. So we cannot have a legal framework made up mainly by secondary legislation. Second point, we need to have a legal and institutional framework system that is intelligible to people. We need to simplify it, to make clearly, to identify clearly who does what and who is responsible for what in the whole process of reception, protection, and integration. It is hard for the national operators to exactly understand to whom they should address for which issues. Can you imagine what happens for immigrants with the whole important effects that this have, so that it's very much easy and likable to make a mistake and to do the wrong proceedings. We definitely need to be institutionally clear and intelligible, and to solve the problem of the fragmentation of responsibility. And my third point, and then it's going to be over, is the importance of the local level for integration. We have gathered a lot of very relevant experience at the local level, even in Italy, where you think that, through the hotspot approach, you have mass, large reception centers where the human dignity seems to be violated in the daily lives. Yet, when you go to the second level of the reception system, you find wonderful experience, systematic, wonderful experience of integration at the local level, with local community able to understand, to solve the problem, and even to profit from the presence of young new families in rural areas that help system to run, social system that helps schools to remain working, that helps services to remain working. So there might be very, I would say, strategic, symbiotic relationship between new arrivals and nationals living at the local level. So definitely we'll need to implement this and to look at this experience and to learn and to spread some positive messages as well. That's all from Italy. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Veronica. Ursula, I'll give the room for you from Austria.
Thank you very much. Listening to all of you, it was really showing once more how much this quite complicated project with macro, meso, micro level perspective really proved to be right. Yeah. So we got all these different levels in, and we talked to so many people, and this is really something that turns out to be quite fruitful. Some observations on Austria. Austria has been a major receiving country around 2015. Yes, this is true. What it turns out now to be is a rather reluctant receiving country. Yeah, so it's not very, very open anymore. Though it has a very long migration history. Austria is really an immigration country. It has received large numbers of refugees during the Cold War period during the 1990s, during the so-called Balkan Wars. But still, we see a lot of new legal restrictions, also when it comes to reception and integration. A second observation, and we have already published on this was not a refugee crisis, but it's very clear. It was a political crisis, so it still is a political crisis on the supranational level, also on the national level in Austria, that goes down to party politics. So there were elections kind of very much influenced by this so-called refugee crisis. Ursula El-Tayeb in the previous session already talked about major challenges. I see that protracted reception and the de facto ban from the labor market for asylum seekers to be one of the really major challenges, and that's why I'm coming back to this. It's a key aspect contributing to a sense of isolation among asylum seekers, social degradation, with giving them no chance to live an independent life. When I come back to the political crisis and talking about Austria, what we also see, and I still stay with the areas of reception and integration, is a crisis of governance. We see different levels and different stances and conditions on different levels. The national level saying integration is only for beneficiaries. Before that, integration doesn't really matter. While on the local level and on the federal provincial level, there are measures for asylum seekers, also like language courses. So this results in different conditions. This is really like the lottery, where do you end up and what is offered to you, and an ever larger cleavage. One final remark, and this is where I go back to what we heard yesterday about COVID-19. What we see in Austria is really that refugees, asylum seekers, beneficiaries are really hit very hard by COVID-19. This most of all refers to the labor markets in Austria. Now we have unemployment numbers that have the highest unemployed numbers since World War II. So they have problems accessing the labor market, and this, with the ongoing pandemic, is really reinforced by this. So there is a lot to be done, and there definitely need to be more efforts to bring refugees to work. And this is something that in almost all of the interviews with asylum seekers and with beneficiaries that have been asylum seekers before, they always talked about how important it would be for them to have been able to work from an early stage on. And last but not least, I thank all of you. And I also would like to thank Ivan. So we were a very small team. It was Ivan and me, and he really did a great job, and I'm very grateful to him. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ursula. Now let's see if the microphone from Iraq works. William, please.
Yes,
Yeah.
the video. The video. Yeah. Thank you very much, Anwar. Briefly, we learned a lot of from Respond project. At the beginning, our view of the size of the problem was very simple, but then we discovered that the issue is broader than we imagined before. So the designer were in the right way when they designed the project. The second thing, the direct field work with asylum seekers and IDPs victims uncovered facts that we theoretically difficult to obtain. Another thing, we also discovered that the bitter reality of refugees and IDPs was deeper and more dangerous than what is published and covered by the media across the regional and international areas. We discovered also there is a major gap that Iraq had to cover between what to be achieved by international standard in the border control, reception, protection, and integration, and what is on the ground. It was also found that the level of tragedy and disaster of refugees and displaced persons is not within a single line. There was difference between the Iraqi and the Syrian and Palestinian. There was different behavior or dealing with them. The second, another issue is we has understood how European think of refugee issue through working and contacting the experts responsible for Respond. Respond was very important for us indeed. And also HHRO and the Iraqi expert get benefit from dealing with the international organization and with the international experts through Respond, and especially with the UNHCR, IOM, and UNICEF, all these organizations. Because of Respond, we became able to offer help to Iraqi authorities and to Iraqi government and its local authority, and provide with expertise with regard to refugee coming to Iraq. It is also able to provide legal advice and contribute to the legislation of refugee laws. So I am very grateful to my colleague in Respond, and the way it was designed, we got the benefit of this, and we got a very highly experience of the Respond. And also I thank all my colleagues and all my friends. They were working in this project. It was very unique and useful for our experience, and especially for Iraq, because Iraq still facing problems and unstable country, and the refugees, whether they are Syrian and Palestinian and other, they are seeking to a third country because still the situation in Iraq is still unstable. It's not like comparing with the European country like Austria and Sweden and other countries. Thank you very much for all.
Thank you very much, William, and thank you all in the panel here. Now, I think we will open the floor for other questions from the audience. If I'm not wrong, we already have one from one of the audience with reference to the Arab Spring and conflicts which ensued. How far in advance did the EU prepare in view of potential outpour of refugees? Do we have any other questions also, Sonia? I think.
Yeah, there is one question just landed in just now by Robert Makutsa. To add on Susan Rothman, last comment, I really like the quote from academic philosopher Tariq Ramadan. He states, your enemy is not refugee, your enemy is the one who made him a refugee. He captures a transparent, objective view of the current refugee challenges. What are the panelists' view on his summation? So, on his opinion. So this is one question. The other question is partly answered, maybe fully answered in the chat box.
Anyone from the panel who would like to reflect on this?
Yeah,
I think we had a question also for the German team that you kind of handled through the chat. So do you want to sum it up, what it was about?
I think it was very country specific and referred to the residential obligation in Germany. I think everyone who is interested can have a look in the chat box.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay then. Susan, can you just take this question? So about Tariq Ramadan's quotation from Tariq Ramadan.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's I agree. Yeah, that's beautiful. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, if we could distill this conference down into one sentence, maybe it could be something like that there's a total misrecognition of the problem and how to solve it. And so yeah, I just I don't know, it's just there seems to be such a disconnect between the policy and the experience of refugees that we have seen in all the countries. So to the extent, I mean, for some of us, we care about the refugees deeply, in that sense, but for others, even if you care about policy only, or even if you care about something else, it seems like we need to address refugees' needs in order to make progress on security or whatever the other objectives are. That's just my opinion.
Thank you, Susan. I think if there are no any other comments from anyone, we will. Sabine is no. We want to thank you all, the PIs, the country teams, the researchers, individual researchers, all of those who are even not visible here, but you've been mentioned. Indeed, thank you very much for your participation. There is a much larger team behind the screen that is not seen here and not mentioned, so thank you very much. Soner and I would just like to say, let me at least start and thanking very much for the organization. First of all, Jelka, Leon, and Marlene, but also Alexander and Sabine, who have been really made this great. Now, if we would have met in real life, we would have hugged, given kisses, which we're not allowed to. So electronic kisses are allowed. Thank you very much. That's a good thing with the Zoom. Soner?
Thanks a lot. I would also like to thank all Respond team members, all conference participants for their attendance, especially for Respond team members for their determination and their enormous work to finalize this project, this highly complex project with so many intellectual and practical outputs. It's really pleasure. It was really pleasure to work with all of you. Thank you for the conference organizers. No need to say it was a top-notch event, so everything was went very smoothly. I am very happy with the results. So this is my personal opinion. Just last one remark. So regarding the migration and asylum policies, the trend, as a political activist before joining to academic circles, so this is difficult times. We are just passing through difficult times. But as a strategy, what I was doing in Turkey, we always encounter with difficult times. The best strategy is to protect what you have. So not to idealize, just to be realistic, but what you have. Because we are just facing globally a restrictive turn, everything. It's better to just to defend human rights, refugee rights, and that can be a very good message to not only the researchers, also the activists working in this field. Thank you all.
And now I have to come with my bunch of flowers. You know, that is a very positive thing with a digital format. You can use the same bunch of flowers from panel to panel. But now, when I leave the room, I will get over the room to Jelka and pass these flowers to Jelka, because she and her team did such a wonderful job. I'm very, very grateful that you set up this digital infrastructure in such a smooth way and took care of us in such a nice way. It was just great. And it was really a good feeling that I had you in my back for this kind of very difficult organizing in a, you know, per emails and in this kind of time. So thanks a lot, Jelka, Leon and Marlene, but we will meet in person out at the corridor.
Thank you, and I'm taking the flowers on behalf of everyone and sharing them digitally.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Bye, everybody. Thank you.
Bye.